The courthouse hallway smelled of floor wax and old wood. Anthony Rivers, 58, pushed his cleaning cart past the marble columns, his janitorial uniform crisp despite the early morning hour. He'd been working at the federal courthouse for 6 months, a temporary assignment while he waited for something else, something no one in this building knew about. As he mopped near courtroom 7, he heard raised voices. A young lawyer, maybe 30, was berating a clerk about misplaced documents. The lawyer's expensive suit probably cost more than Anthony made in a month. Their eyes met for just a second. The lawyer's lip curled with contempt before he turned away, dismissing Anthony as beneath his notice. That dismissal would cost him everything. "Excuse me," the lawyer called out, snapping his fingers at Anthony. "You, janitor." Anthony turned slowly, mop in hand. "Yes, sir?" "These floors are filthy." I nearly slipped. "Do your job properly or find work elsewhere." Anthony looked at the spotless marble floor he'd just cleaned. "I'll make sure to go over it again," the lawyer scoffed. "People like you are why this country is going downhill. No work ethic, no pride." What the lawyer didn't know was that Anthony Rivers wasn't just a janitor. He was a federal judge, one of the most respected in the circuit. And tomorrow, this arrogant attorney would stand before him in court, completely unaware that the janitor he'd just humiliated held his client's fate in his hands. Justice has a way of finding those who abuse power, and this lawyer was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next morning, attorney Blake Morrison strode into courtroom 7 with his usual confidence. At 32, he'd already made partner at his father's law firm, winning cases through aggressive tactics and family connections rather than actual skill. His client, a wealthy real estate developer accused of fraud, sat nervously at the defense table. Blake barely acknowledged him, too busy checking his reflection in his phone. "All rise," the bailiff announced, the Honorable Judge Anthony Rivers presiding. Blake stood mechanically, still scrolling through emails. He'd done minimal preparation. This judge was supposedly a pushover according to his father's old connections. When he finally looked up, his blood ran cold. Walking to the bench in full judicial robes was the janitor from yesterday, the man he'd berated, the man he'd told had no work ethic. Blake's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the floor. Judge Rivers settled into his chair, his face expressionless as he surveyed the courtroom. When his eyes landed on Blake, there was the briefest flicker, not of anger, but of something that might have been disappointment. "Counsel, you may be seated," Rivers said calmly. Blake sat heavily, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. The janitor was a judge? A federal judge? His client leaned over, whispering urgently, "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I might have," Blake muttered. Judge Rivers opened the case file. "We're here for the preliminary hearing in United States versus Marcus Whitfield. Mr. Morrison, I understand you're representing the defendant." Blake stood shakily. "Yes, Your Honor." "Have you reviewed the prosecution's evidence?" Yes, Your Honor." "And you've prepared your response?" Blake had barely looked at the case. He'd assumed this would be a quick appearance, maybe get a continuance, push it off until his father could work some connections. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a continuance to—" "On what grounds?" Rivers interrupted, his voice neutral but firm. "To properly prepare my defense strategy." Rivers leaned back. "Mr. Morrison, you've had this case for 3 weeks. The prosecution filed their motion 2 weeks ago. What exactly have you been doing with your time?" Blake's mouth went dry. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Torres, was barely suppressing a smile. "Your Honor, I've been occupied with other cases." "Other cases," Rivers repeated. "So you're telling this court that you took on a case you knew you couldn't properly handle? That you failed to serve your client's interests because you were busy?" Blake's face flushed. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, counselor?" The trap was closing. Blake could see it, but couldn't escape it. Every word he said made it worse. "I simply need more time to review evidence you've had for weeks," Rivers finished. "Motion denied. We'll proceed with the hearing." Blake sat down hard. His client grabbed his arm. "What the hell is happening? I paid your firm $50,000 for representation, and you haven't even prepared." "I can handle this," Blake hissed, though he clearly couldn't. Judge Rivers addressed the prosecution. "Miss Torres, please present your opening argument." Torres stood, confident and prepared. She laid out a devastating case, financial records showing systematic fraud, witness testimonies, email trails. Every piece of evidence was meticulously documented. Blake's panic grew with each revelation. He hadn't read any of this. He had no counter-argument, no strategy, nothing. When Torres finished, Rivers turned to Blake. "Mr. Morrison, your response?" Blake stood on shaky legs. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case is based on circumstantial evidence and, Rivers prompted. Blake's mind went blank. He couldn't remember basic legal terms. His expensive education, his family connections, none of it helped him now. That is to say, Counselor, are you prepared to make an argument or not? I need a moment to consult with my client." "You've had weeks to consult with your client," Rivers said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Either present your defense or sit down." Blake sat down, defeated. His client stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to request new counsel. It's clear Mr. Morrison is unprepared." "Sit down, Mr. Whitfield," Rivers ordered. "You hired Mr. Morrison. You're stuck with him for now. We'll address counsel changes after this hearing." Then Rivers did something unexpected. He looked directly at Blake. "Mr. Morrison, do you remember what you said to me yesterday?" The courtroom went silent. Blake's face turned white. "You said people like me have no work ethic, no pride, that we're what's wrong with this country." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Your Honor, I didn't know." "You didn't know I was a judge," Rivers interrupted. "So that makes it acceptable? You thought I was just a janitor, so it was fine to treat me with contempt?" Blake couldn't answer. "Let me tell you something about work ethic, Counselor. I worked as a janitor in this courthouse for 6 months. I scrubbed toilets. I mopped floors. I did it because my doctor ordered me to take a break from the bench after a health scare. I needed simple, physical work. No stress, no life-or-death decisions." The courtroom was riveted. "Every morning, I showed up at 5 a.m. I took pride in making sure every floor was spotless, every surface clean. That's work ethic, Mr. Morrison. Showing up, doing your job, taking pride in your work, no matter what it is." Rivers leaned forward. "But you wouldn't know about that, would you? You've had everything handed to you. Partnership at your father's firm. Cases you didn't earn. Success you didn't work for." Blake tried to speak, but Rivers wasn't finished. "This courtroom isn't about who has the most expensive suit or the best connections. It's about preparation, dedication, respect for the law, and for every person who enters these doors." Torres, the prosecutor, was watching with barely concealed satisfaction. She'd dealt with Blake's type before, entitled lawyers who thought the rules didn't apply to them. "Your Honor," Blake tried again, his voice cracking. "I apologize for my behavior yesterday. I was out of line." "Yes, you were," Rivers agreed, "but that's not why I'm addressing this now. I'm addressing it because your contempt for people you deem beneath you has infected your entire approach to law. You didn't prepare for this case because you assumed it would be easy. You thought I'd be a pushover judge who'd grant your continuance without question." Rivers pulled out a file. "I've reviewed your record, Mr. Morrison. 17 cases in the past 2 years. 12 continuances requested. 8 complaints filed about inadequate preparation. Your father's law firm has been cleaning up your messes." Blake's client stood again. "Your Honor, I demand new counsel immediately. I will not have my freedom jeopardized by this incompetent—" "Mr. Whitfield, you were warned," Rivers said sharply. "You chose Morrison and Associates because you thought the family name would buy you favorable treatment. You chose wrong." He turned back to Blake. "However, Mr. Whitfield raises a valid point. Mr. Morrison, are you capable of adequately representing your client in this matter?" It was a direct challenge. Blake could admit his incompetence and request withdrawal. humiliating himself professionally. Or he could claim competence and risk everything on a case he wasn't prepared for. His pride made the choice. "I am fully capable of representing my client, Your Honor." Rivers studied him for a long moment. "Very well. Then let's proceed. The prosecution has presented compelling evidence of fraudulent activity. I'd like to hear your defense, Counselor, and it better be more substantial than 'I need more time.'" Blake's hands trembled as he shuffled through papers he hadn't properly read. His client was glaring at him with pure hatred. The prosecutor was already preparing for victory, and the judge, the man he'd dismissed as a mere janitor, was watching with the calm patience of someone who already knew how this would end. Blake's defense was a disaster. He contradicted himself 3 times. He misquoted case law. He confused basic legal principles that first-year law students would know. Torres barely had to object. Blake was destroying himself. After 20 painful minutes, Rivers held up his hand. "That's enough, Counselor." Blake stopped mid-sentence, grateful for any reprieve. "Mr. Morrison, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such inadequate representation. You've not only failed your client, you've failed the court and the justice system itself." Rivers pulled out another document. "I'm holding you in contempt of court for your unprofessional conduct and inadequate preparation. I'm also recommending you to the state bar for disciplinary review." Blake's legs nearly gave out. "Your Honor, please. Furthermore, I'm granting Mr. Whitfield's request for new counsel. You're removed from this case effective immediately." Blake's client actually smiled. Anything was better than this disaster. "But, Your Honor," Blake protested weakly, "this is because of yesterday, isn't it? You're punishing me because I didn't know who you were." Rivers' expression hardened. "No, Mr. Morrison. I'm holding you accountable because you're a poor lawyer who's been coasting on your father's reputation. Yesterday simply revealed your true character." He leaned back in his chair. "You see, when you dismissed me as just a janitor, you revealed how you see the world. People are either useful to you or beneath your notice. That same arrogance led you to dismiss this case as unworthy of your time. But the law doesn't care about your arrogance. Justice doesn't bow to family connections, and in my courtroom, everyone, from the janitor to the judge, deserves respect." The bailiff approached Blake. "Sir, you need to leave the courtroom." Blake gathered his papers with shaking hands. His career was over. His father would disown him. Everything he'd taken for granted was crumbling. As he walked toward the exit, Rivers spoke one more time. "Mr. Morrison." Blake turned. "The janitor you mocked? He worked harder in one day than you've worked in your entire legal career. Remember that." The courthouse hallway was crowded when Blake stumbled out. Word had spread. The arrogant Morrison kid had been destroyed in court. Lawyers whispered. Clerks stared. Even the actual janitor, an elderly man named Thomas, shook his head as Blake passed. Blake's phone rang. His father. "What the hell did you do?" Morrison Sr.'s voice was ice. "Dad, I just got a call from Judge Rivers' clerk. Contempt of court? Bar review? Do you have any idea what this will do to the firm? I didn't know he was a judge. That's your defense? You thought it was okay to humiliate someone because they were a janitor?" Blake had no answer. "You're done, Blake. Done at the firm. Done in this state. I won't protect you from this." The call ended. Blake stood in the hallway. His entire world collapsed. But Judge Rivers wasn't finished. Epilogue. 2 months later, Blake Morrison sat in a small office at the Legal Aid Society, processing paperwork for people who couldn't afford lawyers. It was part of his bar suspension agreement. 500 hours of pro bono work before he could even apply for reinstatement. The work was humbling. These clients had real problems: evictions, custody battles, disability claims. They needed help desperately. For the first time in his life, Blake actually read case files. He actually prepared. He actually cared. One day, an elderly janitor came in, needing help with an employment dispute. Blake spent 3 hours reviewing his case, finding precedents, building an argument. The janitor thanked him, tears in his eyes. "No lawyer ever took time for someone like me before." Blake felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. 6 months into his suspension, Blake received a letter. Judge Rivers had written a recommendation to the bar noting Blake's progress and transformation. The letter ended with, "Everyone deserves a second chance." But second chances must be earned through genuine change, not entitled expectations. Mr. Morrison appears to be learning that lesson. Blake framed that letter, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the man he'd been and the man he needed to become. The story of Blake Morrison and Judge Rivers became legendary in legal circles, not because of the dramatic courtroom scene, but because of what it represented. How many times do we dismiss people based on their job, their appearance, their status? How often do we treat service workers as invisible, unworthy of basic respect? Judge Rivers could have simply reported Blake to the bar. Instead, he used the courtroom as a teaching moment, not just for Blake, but for everyone watching. He reminded us that dignity isn't determined by title or salary, that the person cleaning the floors might have more integrity than the person in the corner office, that respect should be given freely, not earned through status. Blake learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it. If this story resonated with you, ask yourself, how do you treat the people society tells you are beneath you? The janitor, the cashier, the sautar, the server, and the security guard. They're someone's parent, someone's child, someone's hero. They deserve respect not because of what they can do for you, but because they're human. Share this story with someone who needs that reminder. Subscribe to Real Justice Stories for more tales of dignity, humility, and the justice that comes when arrogance meets accountability. Because real justice isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. Thank you for watching. Remember, everyone you meet deserves respect. The janitor might be more than he seems, and karma has perfect timing.